Brought to you by First Edition Publishing.
What is Jiu Jitsu? The Martial Arts and How to Understand Them. By D.S. Hopkins. Read by Robert Ashton. Most students, athletes, masters, or grandmasters of martial arts allocate time for the development of physical attributes such as the cardiovascular system or the musculature system, cognizant of the impact of anatomical systems that can perform for a longer period of time and at a higher output than ordinary. But such things, as beneficial as they are, can by no means be the first concern or the first goals sought by the student of combat. To learn the art itself must be the first priority, and the comprehension of that curriculum must precede all considerations such as becoming stronger, heavier, leaner, or faster. These latter attributes, of course, will develop over and in their own time, but supplementing martial practice with an extracurricular commitment is going to require a division of focus and resources, which means we must be very sure before we make such expenditures. It has been a goal of this writer to meet auxiliary objectives like strength or respiratory development by enhancing the martial training regimen itself using ankle or wrist weights, accelerating pace to create conditions to promote cardiovascular goals, all while never allowing focus on the martial training to falter or waver. The notion that a high proportion of muscle mass will place a massive magnification on combat skill is as reasonable as the notion that the ability to fight will make it far easier to lift weights. A gymnast, a bodybuilder, and a marathon runner have about as much chance of beating a martial artist in a fight as the martial artist does of outperforming the gymnast on the pommel horse, the bodybuilder in a deadlift, or the marathon runner in a 42.2-kilometer run. It's the kind of uninformed supposition that ranks with the idea that a marathon runner will make an excellent soccer player because he's good at running. It entirely ignores the necessity of ball control, passing technique, and shooting technique, all while maintaining the first focus, which is the protection of the ball. The marathon runner's conditioning in itself wouldn't be unhelpful, but it would only be useful if the person had the basic skills of the game in question. Now imagine a male ballerina. They have far more flexibility and more balance than someone in Taekwondo. But does this mean that a ballerina will win full-contact striking tournaments and fend off street attackers? Absurd. The question as to how much strength is required to begin a study of combat discipline is not hard to answer, but what is a little more complicated to explain is the effect a physical attribute like strength has on martial practice. To begin, a person needs little to nil, and this is because the challenges early on are going to be structured and measured to stay within the ability of the student. To impart the early and essential precepts, the displacements and understanding of bodily limitations, and the introductory techniques, it is most necessary to stay within the student's ability. Otherwise, the only persons that would possess the ability to perform the maneuvers are those that have already learned them somewhere else. While only a very little strength is required to begin, because the opponent's attacks are carefully restrained and controlled, doesn't mean the process of learning is designed to remain that way. Eventually, little by little, the restraints are slowly slackened, and this predictably forces the student to work much harder to make the same maneuvers succeed. While strength will be forced to increase as the training unfolds, it will not be the attribute relied upon to perform the maneuvers, as it itself will be insufficient to accomplish such a task. The maneuvers will continue to succeed because skill level in the student has been undergoing a steady increase. To accomplish the maneuvers, the actual principles of the martial processes must become sharper and faster, a state of being only comprehension and repetition and amelioration can produce. Strength is much like balance, reflex, coordination, and stamina. A critical minimum is required not to learn the art, but to eventually fight with it. These critical minimums could be understood as that smallest amount of reflex, balance, agility, coordination, strength, stamina, or flexibility necessary that must be present for a student to be able to practically execute the maneuver. If someone begins a practice and is already very flexible, balanced, or strong, it will be that much easier to learn maneuvers that demand these minimums. But the danger is that such natural ability is seductively easy to become dependent on, a crutch basically, allowing us to have shoddier technical skill and to make up for it with our innate physiological characteristics. This can be neutralized as a pitfall by forcing the flexible, stronger, or faster student into performing the maneuver with greater resistance earlier in the curriculum and force them away from a potential dependence on bodily advantages. If, on the other hand, someone begins a practice and is uncommonly rigid, unbalanced, or weak, it will be more difficult to learn the maneuvers, but the advantage is that the learning will require a heavy emphasis on combat principles and processes, compensating for deficiencies of anatomy with hyper-accurate execution of movements and heightened usage of the art's precepts, assuming the potential capability exists.